The worst day of my life started with a pain I didn't understand and ended with a silence I'd never forget. I was 17, barely out of high school, and my body was betraying me. Contractions, sharp and relentless, were tearing through me in the hospital room, while just down the hall, my mother was slipping away. One life was fighting to begin, another was fading. The nurses kept their voices low, but I heard the hushed tones, the frantic beeps from her room. My mom, my anchor, had suffered a massive stroke. She never woke up. Sam came into the world screaming, a tiny, furious bundle of life. He was perfect, all 10 fingers and 10 toes, but I couldn't hold him without feeling the phantom weight of what I'd lost. My mother, my best friend, was gone, just like that. The day Sam was born, I died too, in a way. The old Hadley, the one who believed in family and unconditional love, ceased to exist. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed, judgmental whispers. My extended family, the people who were supposed to be my support system, moved around me like I was a ghost, an inconvenient truth. Marlene, my grandmother, a woman whose face was permanently set in a disapproving frown, didn't even meet my eyes. Addison, my aunt, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that made my teeth ache, delivered the eulogy. She spoke of my mother's grace, her community work, her unwavering faith. She painted a picture of a perfect woman, a pillar of the community. But in her carefully crafted narrative, there was no mention of me, no mention of her only child, the daughter she had raised, the one who was now holding her newborn son, utterly alone. It was like I'd been erased, a smudge on the family's pristine reputation. The will reading was even worse. It happened a week later in a stuffy lawyer's office downtown. My Aunt Addison, her husband Gordon, my grandmother Marlene, and my cousins Rebecca and Isabel were all there. I sat in the corner, Sam asleep in his carrier beside me, feeling like an intruder. The lawyer, a man with thin hair and a nervous cough, cleared his throat. He read through the legalese, the bequests to various charities, to distant cousins I'd never met. And then he finished. Nothing. Not a single mention of me, Hadley Ellis. My mother, who had always promised me her home, her forever home, had left me absolutely nothing. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach, far worse than any labor pain. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the final crushing blow, the ultimate rejection. As I gathered Sam and my meager belongings, I overheard Addison's hushed voice to Gordon. "It was taken care of," she murmured, a smug satisfaction in her tone. "The real will. No loose ends." Gordon just grunted in agreement. The real will. The words echoed in my head, a chilling premonition. That night, Sam and I ended up in a shelter, a cot in a communal room, the smell of disinfectant and despair clinging to the air. My newborn son, innocent and helpless, deserved so much more. Lying there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of strangers, a quiet, burning resolve ignited within me. They had taken everything. My mother, her memory, my inheritance, my place in the family. They had left me with nothing but a newborn and a mountain of grief. But I swore, right then and there, that no one would ever be able to take anything from me again. I would build something, something they couldn't touch. As I walked out of the lawyer's office that day, the late afternoon sun felt like a spotlight on my shame. My eyes fell on the familiar 2-story colonial at the end of the street, the house where I'd grown up, where my mother had tucked me into bed every night. A stark white "For Sale" sign stood proudly on the manicured lawn. It was like a final cruel punctuation mark on the end of my childhood. 6 years later, the sting of that day had dulled, But the scar remained. 6 years. Sam was 6 now, a bright, curious boy with a mop of brown hair and eyes that saw everything. He was my reason, my quiet inspiration. And I was Hadley Ellis, 23 years old, a single mother and a damn good contractor. Life in the shelter had been a brutal lesson, but it had also been the crucible that forged me. I learned to be resourceful, to be invisible when I needed to be, and to work harder than anyone else. I started with odd jobs, then moved into basic renovations, learning everything I could about plumbing, electrical, framing. I had a knack for it, a meticulous eye for detail, and a relentless drive. Soon I was flipping properties, small ones at first, then bigger. My business, Ellis Renovations, was modest but stable. Every dollar I earned, every nail I hammered was a brick in the wall I was building around Sam and me, a wall no one could tear down. I wasn't actively looking for that house, not consciously anyway. My focus was on my next flip, a rundown duplex on the other side of town. But one Tuesday morning, scrolling through new listings, a familiar address jumped out at me. 142 Willow Creek Lane. My breath hitched. It was my childhood home. The for sale sign I'd seen 6 years ago had apparently led to nothing. It had been rented out for years, I knew that much. But now it was back on the market. The listing photos were grainy, showing a house that looked tired, neglected. The price was surprisingly low, a reflection of its condition, and, I suspected, a quiet sale that hadn't garnered much attention yet. My finger hovered over the contact button. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a property, it was a ghost, a challenge, a promise. I moved fast. I called the agent, set up a viewing. I walked through the familiar rooms, the faded wallpaper, the scuffed floors, and felt a strange mix of grief and fierce determination. It was exactly as I remembered it, yet utterly different. It was empty, hollow, but I saw past the neglect. I saw the potential. More importantly, I saw my potential. I didn't use my real name, not my full name anyway. I used Hadley Harper for the initial inquiries, then registered the purchase under newly formed LLC, a common practice for investors. No fanfare, no attention, just a series of signatures, a wire transfer, and a quiet closing. On a Tuesday afternoon, 6 years and 3 months after I'd watched that for sale sign go up, my mother's house, my forever home, was mine. The first time I walked through it as the owner, the keys heavy in my hand, Sam was at school. The silence was deafening. I ran my hand over the banister, the same one I'd slid down as a kid. I stood in the living room, remembering my mom curled up on the sofa, reading. "This house," she'd said once, her voice soft, "is our forever home, sweet pea. It's always going to be here for you." Her words, a whispered promise, echoed in the quiet. They thought they'd taken it. They thought they'd erased her promise, but they were wrong. I spent the next few weeks meticulously planning the renovations, sketching out layouts, sourcing materials. I wanted to restore it, yes, but also to make it mine, to imprint my own story on its bones. I was in the kitchen one afternoon, tearing out a section of old cabinetry, dust motes dancing in the sunlight when I heard it. A hesitant knock on the front door. I froze. Who could it be? No one knew I was here. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked to the door, pulling it open. Standing on my porch, looking utterly flustered and disheveled, was Addison, my Aunt Addison, and behind her Gordon, Rebecca, and a much taller Isabel. Addison's eyes, wide with a mixture of desperation and something else I couldn't quite place, scanned me, then the interior of the house. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice strained. We seem to have a bit of a problem. Our new house, well, the pipes burst." Everything's flooded. We have nowhere to go." She wrung her hands. "We saw the lights on here and we just thought, maybe you're the new owner? We just need a place for a few nights until the insurance sorts things out." She looked at me, her expression pleading. It's our old family home, you see. We thought perhaps you'd be understanding." They hadn't recognized me, not yet. I looked at Addison, at Gordon's passive face behind her, at Rebecca, who was already scanning the house with a familiar critical gaze, and at Isabel, who looked genuinely distressed. Desperation was a powerful motivator, and it was written all over Addison's face. This was it. The universe, or perhaps something more poetic, had just handed me an opportunity I hadn't dared to dream of. I kept my expression neutral, almost sympathetic. "Oh, that's terrible," I said, my voice calm even. "Pipes bursting are a nightmare. Yes, you can stay here." Addison blinked, clearly surprised by my immediate agreement. "Oh, thank you so much," she gushed, relief washing over her face. "We just need a few nights, truly. We'll be out of your hair as soon as we can." "Of course," I replied, stepping back to let them in. "Make yourselves at home. I'm Harper, by the way. Harper Ellis." I offered a small, polite smile. The Harper was a nod to the name I'd used for the initial inquiries, a convenient half-truth. The Ellis was my own, a silent assertion. They trooped in, their luggage bumping against the freshly painted walls. The house was still a work in progress, but the main living areas were functional. I showed them to the guest rooms, which I had deliberately left largely untouched from their original layouts, just with fresh paint and updated fixtures. "The rooms upstairs are mostly ready," I explained. "Feel free to pick one. There's a bathroom on each floor." Addison looked around, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "It's familiar," she murmured, almost to herself. Gordon just nodded, already looking for a comfortable chair. Rebecca, now 22, taller and sharper edged than I remembered, wandered off toward the kitchen, her eyes narrowed. Isabel, 17, looked around with a quiet curiosity, a stark contrast to her older sister. Over the next few days, a slow, insidious tension began to build. I moved around the house, continuing my renovations, always present, always observing. I saw the dynamics I remembered amplified by their current predicament. Addison was still the matriarch, constantly issuing directives, even to me, the homeowner. Gordon was still her silent enabler, nodding along, avoiding eye contact. Rebecca was still the entitled princess, complaining about the lack of amenities, the dust. And Isabel, bless her heart, was still the quiet observer, the one who seemed to notice things. One evening during dinner, a simple meal I prepared, watching them eat, at my kitchen island, Rebecca was caught staring at me, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You know," she said, her brow furrowed, "you look like someone I used to know. It's uncanny." I just smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Oh, who's that?" She shook her head, dismissing it. "No one important, just a girl from school, Hadley. You two could be sisters." "Really?" I asked, my voice flat. "What a coincidence." I noticed their dysfunction was still very much unraveling. Addison and Gordon bickered constantly about money. Rebecca complained about her job, her boyfriend, her life. Marlene, my grandmother, hadn't shown up yet, claiming she was too delicate for a construction zone. It was a perfect storm of their own making, and I was merely providing the stage. I had subtly redesigned their childhood rooms. Isabel's room, once a cheerful yellow, was now a serene blue, but the antique desk her grandmother had given her was still there, polished and prominent. Rebecca's room, which had been a chaotic mess of posters and clothes, was now minimalist and stark. but the small, ornate jewelry box she'd always kept on her dresser was conspicuously absent. I wanted them to feel a discomforting familiarity, a sense that something was off, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. One afternoon, Sam, who was now used to having guests in his house, was drawing at the kitchen table. He'd just finished a vibrant crayon scribbled portrait of a woman with long, dark hair. "Mommy," he announced proudly, holding it up for me, "this is Grandma Ellis." He pointed to the drawing. "You told me she loved flowers, so I put lots of flowers in her hair?" Addison, who had just walked in, froze. Her eyes darted from the drawing to me. "Grandma Ellis?" she repeated, her voice thin. "Who is that, Harper?" "My mother," I said, my voice even. "Sam's grandmother." Sam, oblivious, piped up, "Yeah, Mommy said I was almost named after her, but then she changed her mind. My name was almost Marlene." A cold silence descended. Addison's eyes, sharp and suddenly calculating, fixed on me. "You said your name was Harper," she said, her voice slow, deliberate. "Not Hadley." I met her gaze, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "Did I?" I asked, my voice soft, innocent. "My full name is Hadley Harper Ellis. Most people just call me Harper." The lie was out, the bait taken. The hook was set. The air in the kitchen thickened after Sam's innocent revelation. Addison's face, usually so composed, was a mask of barely concealed suspicion. Gordon shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca just stared, her eyes wide. Isabel, however, looked from Sam's drawing to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. The silence stretched, heavy and awkward. "Well," Addison finally said, her voice brittle, "that's quite a coincidence, isn't it? Hadley, Harper, so similar." She forced a tight smile. "I suppose you get that a lot." "Sometimes," I replied, my gaze unwavering. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I could almost see it taking root in their minds. Over the next few days, the tension in the house became palpable. Isabel, bless her inquisitive nature, started asking too many questions. She'd follow me around the house, watching me work, her eyes taking everything in. "This house feels different now," she'd say, "but also the same. Did Aunt Marlene like this color blue?" Or, "My mom used to have a vase just like that one in the living room. Is it new?" I'd give vague answers, letting her draw her own conclusions. She was the one who seemed most genuinely confused, torn between the narrative her family presented and the unsettling familiarity of the house. Sam, meanwhile, was a constant, unwitting reminder of my mother. He loved drawing, and his latest obsession was portraits of Grandma Ellis based on my descriptions. He drew her with a kind face, surrounded by flowers, just like I'd told him she loved. One afternoon, he proudly presented a new drawing to Addison and Gordon. It was a remarkably accurate depiction of my mother's face, rendered in bright, cheerful crayons. Addison recoiled as if she'd been slapped. "Sam, dear," she said, her voice strained, "that's a lovely drawing, but perhaps you could draw something else? A car, maybe?" The discomfort was evident. My mother's presence, even in crayon, was clearly unwelcome. I had been systematically going through the house, room by room, making my changes. I had a feeling, a deep intuition, that my mother would have left something behind, something they hadn't found. I remembered her talking about a secret spot in the basement, a place where she kept her most treasured memories. It was a vague childhood memory, but it had stuck with me. One rainy afternoon, while Sam was napping, I ventured into the basement. It was damp and smelled faintly of mildew, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. I remembered my mother pointing to a section of the old brick foundation wall near the laundry area, saying, "This is where I keep my secrets, Hadley Bug, safe and sound." I ran my hands over the rough bricks, feeling for any loose ones. It took me almost an hour, my fingers growing sore, but then my hand brushed against a brick that felt slightly different, less mortared. I wiggled it. It moved. My heart pounded. Carefully I worked it loose, then the one next to it. Behind them, nestled in a small dark cavity, was a tarnished metal lockbox. It was old, probably from my grandmother's generation, and heavy. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. I carried it upstairs into the quiet of the living room. The lock was old-fashioned, a simple clasp. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst some yellowed lace and a few dried flowers, was a thick envelope. My name, Hadley Ellis, was written on it in my mother's elegant script, and beneath it a smaller, folded document, a will, dated after the one that had been read in the lawyer's office. My hand shook as I pulled out the letter first. It was short, written on her personal stationery. My dearest Hadley, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And if you are reading this, it means they tried to take everything from you. I know they will. Addison has always been consumed by greed and Marlene by appearances. They will try to erase you, to claim I disowned you, that I resented you for your pregnancy. They will say I died angry. But that is a lie. My last thoughts were of you. My last conscious act was to clutch the photo of you, my beautiful daughter, holding your pregnant belly. You were and always will be my greatest joy. My only regret is not having more time with you and my grandchild. I have made arrangements. This will, the one enclosed, is my true and final testament. I wanted to protect you, my sweet girl. I wanted to ensure you had your forever home and the means to raise your child in peace. Do not let them tell you otherwise. Do not let them win. This house, this legacy, it is yours. It always was. With all my love, forever, Mom. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging, not tears of sadness, but of a profound, shattering relief. She hadn't hated me. She hadn't disowned me. It had all been a lie, a cruel, calculated deception. The dinner photo she clutched as she slipped into a coma was of me, pregnant. My mother had loved me, always. I wiped my eyes, a fierce, cold resolve settling in my chest. I unfolded the will. It was clear, concise, and legally binding. It left everything, the house, the contents, a substantial trust fund, to me, Hadley Ellis. Addison had suppressed it. She had lied. She had stolen. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in years that wasn't for Sam. It wasn't a happy smile, not really. It was sharp, predatory. I looked at the letter again, at my mother's familiar handwriting. Do not let them win. I folded the documents carefully, placing them back in the lockbox. Then I walked into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and began planning dinner. A family dinner. The next day I started preparing, not just the meal, but the stage. I cleaned the dining room meticulously, polishing the antique mahogany table until it gleamed. This table, my mother's, had hosted countless family dinners, celebrations, and quiet conversations. Now it would host a reckoning. I carefully unwrapped the heirloom dishes, the delicate china with the gold rim that my mother had inherited from her mother, Marlene. Each piece was placed with deliberate precision. I removed all the old family photos from the mantelpiece and the walls. the ones of Addison, Gordon, Rebecca, and Isabel, smiling awkwardly alongside my mother. In their place, I hung Sam's vibrant drawings. His crayon portraits of Grandma Ellis now adorned the walls, bright and undeniable. I also printed a few recent photos of myself with Sam, me laughing with him at the park, me helping him with his homework, me just being a mom. The message was clear. This was my family now. This was my life. I sent a text to Addison. Family night tonight. Dinner at 7. Please let Marlene know, too. She replied almost immediately, "Oh, how lovely, Harper. We'll be there." The slight hesitation in her text was almost imperceptible, but I noticed it. Marlene, my grandmother finally agreed to come, her curiosity apparently outweighing her delicate constitution. As 7 p.m. approached, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Sam was already in bed, tucked in after a special story time. The house was quiet, filled with the aroma of roasted chicken and herbs. I had chosen a simple, comforting meal, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to break. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. I opened it to find Addison, Gordon, Rebecca, Isabel, and Marlene standing on my porch. Marlene, now 70, looked frail, but her eyes were as sharp and judgmental as ever. She took in my appearance, clean jeans, a simple sweater, and her lips thinned. "Harper," Addison said, forcing a smile, "everything smells wonderful." "Come in," I said, my voice even. I led them directly to the dining room. They stepped inside, and a collective gasp rippled through them. The transformation was complete. The room, once a shrine to their shared past, was now undeniably mine. Sam's drawings, vibrant and innocent, were everywhere. My photos with Sam were prominent. The air felt different, cleaner, but also charged. Marlene was the first to speak, her voice a low, disapproving hum. "These walls," she said, running a gloved hand over the newly painted surface. "They feel strange now, not like your mother's house at all." Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on Sam's drawings. "Where are all the old pictures? The family history?" I met her gaze, a cool, unblinking stare. "That's because it isn't your house any more, Marlene," I said, my voice soft but firm enough to carry through the sudden silence. "It's mine." Addison's forced smile vanished. Gordon looked away. Rebecca's jaw tightened. Isabel, however, looked around with a new understanding dawning in her eyes. "What do you mean it's yours?" Addison finally managed, her voice rising slightly. "You bought it, yes, but it's still our family home." "It was your family home," I corrected, my voice still calm. "But families change, and so do homes." I gestured to the table. "Please sit. Dinner's ready." They sat stiff and uncomfortable around the polished table. The clinking of the heirloom china against the polished wood sounded unnervingly loud in the tense silence. I served the food, moving with a deliberate grace, watching their faces. They picked at their plates, the usual chatter absent. The weight of my words, of the transformed room, pressed down on them. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I reached into the pocket of my sweater. My fingers closed around the thick envelope I had retrieved from the lockbox. I pulled it out slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the gleaming mahogany right in the center of the table for all of them to see. The old faded script of my mother's handwriting, my name visible on the front, seemed to glow under the dining room light. Their eyes, one by one, fell on the envelope. Addison's face went pale. Marlene's eyes narrowed to slits. Gordon's mouth opened slightly. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. I looked at each of them, my gaze lingering for a moment on Addison. A small, chilling smile touched my lips. "Shall I read what Mom actually wanted?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the silence like a knife. The silence that followed my question was deafening. Addison's face was a study in controlled panic. Marlene's eyes, usually so calculating, darted between me and the envelope on the table. Gordon looked as if he wanted to disappear into the polished wood. Rebecca just stared, her mouth slightly agape. Isabel, however, watched me with a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity. "What is that, Harper?" Addison finally managed, her voice a strained whisper. "Another one of your coincidences?" I picked up the envelope, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. "This is my mother's true will," I stated, my voice clear and steady. "Dated 3 days after the one you had read to me." "The one that left me nothing?" I pulled out the folded document and the letter, placing the letter face down, but the will, crisp and official looking, was visible. "That's impossible!" Addison shrieked, her control finally snapping. "That's a forgery. My sister would never. She was so disappointed in you. She told us. She wanted everything to go to charity, to the family, not to someone who ruined her good name." "Oh, she told you that, did she?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Funny, because her letter here says something entirely different. It says she loved me. It says she knew you would try to take everything." "You're lying," Rebecca chimed in, finding her voice. "You're just trying to get back at us. This is sick, Hadley." "It is sick," I agreed, my gaze sweeping across their faces. "What you did was sick, but I'm not lying." Just then the front door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Quincy Kennedy. He was a lawyer, an old neighbor of my mother's who had always been kind to me, and someone I had quietly contacted weeks ago after finding the will, just to verify its authenticity and to ask for his presence. He had been waiting in the living room, out of sight, just as we'd planned. "Actually, she's not," Quincy said, his voice calm, professional. "I can confirm the authenticity of this document." He walked over, holding a briefcase. "Marlene Ellis, Addison Crawford, Gordon Crawford, Rebecca Newton, Isabel Crawford. My name is Quincy Kennedy. I was Mrs. Ellis's probate lawyer for many years. She contacted me quite distressed a week before her stroke. She wanted to amend her will, specifically to ensure her daughter, Hadley, was provided for. She was very clear about her wishes." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. "This is my original copy of the will Mrs. Ellis signed. It matches the one Hadley has perfectly. It was filed with the county clerk's office, but it appears it was suppressed. A very serious legal matter, I assure you." Addison gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marlene looked like she'd seen a ghost. Gordon's face was ashen. "Suppressed?" Gordon finally sputtered, his voice cracking. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that this will," Quincy said, tapping the document on the table, "supersedes any previous will. And it clearly states that Hadley Ellis is the sole beneficiary of her mother's estate, including this house, all its contents, and a trust fund." He paused, his gaze firm. "Attempting to conceal or destroy a valid will is a felony, Mr. Crawford, as is defrauding an heir." Addison, looking utterly defeated, pushed back her chair so violently it scraped across the floor. "This is ridiculous." "We're leaving." She stormed out of the dining room, her footsteps heavy as she headed for the front door. But Gordon, Rebecca, and Marlene were stuck. They looked at each other, then at me, then at Quincy. You can't just take everything," Gordon stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "We have rights, family rights. We lived here." "You lived here as guests," I corrected, my voice devoid of emotion. This house, the furniture you're sitting on, the dishes you're eating from, even the buried jewelry box under the plum tree in the backyard that my mother mentioned in her letter, it's all legally mine. It has been for 6 years. I paused, letting that sink in. And as for rights, I believe we're talking about my rights now. I reached into my pocket again, pulling out my phone. The screen glowed, displaying a familiar interface. You know, I said, my voice quiet, it's amazing what people say when they think no one is listening or when they think they're safe. I've had a lot of time to reflect over the years, and I've learned that sometimes the best way to understand people's true intentions is to simply let them talk. I tapped the screen. A low, muffled conversation started playing, barely audible at first, then clearer. It was Addison's voice from just a few nights ago, complaining about me to Gordon. She's so unsettling. I don't know why she's letting us stay here. It's almost like she knows something. We just have to keep up the act. She's just a contractor, a nobody. We needed the money, Gordon. Her mother was going to leave everything to her. Can you believe it? After what she did, we had to make sure that didn't happen. The recording continued, capturing snippets of their casual cruelty, their justifications, their thinly veiled contempt for me, their casual dismissal of my mother's memory, every cutting remark, every confession they didn't know would be used against them. Their faces, already pale, turned a sickly green. The recording played on, a chilling symphony of their casual betrayals. Gordon's face was a mask of horror. Marlene's jaw hung slack, and Rebecca looked utterly defeated, her eyes darting frantically between my phone and Quincy. Isabel, however, had tears in her eyes, not for her family, but for me. The truth, raw and undeniable, hung in the air. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. So, I said, my voice quiet, now you know, and now I know you know. Gordon finally found his voice, a pathetic whine. Hadley, please. This is a misunderstanding. Addison, she just misspoke. We were under so much stress. Stress? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping me. You think you know stress? Try giving birth alone, then burying your mother on the same day, only to be told you're worthless and homeless. That's stress. I looked at Marlene. And you, Grandma, you stood by and watched them do it. You let them erase me from Mom's life, from her memory, all to protect your precious appearances. Marlene just stared at the table, her face crumbling. Rebecca, for once, had nothing to say. Just then the front door slammed open and Addison burst back into the dining room. Her face was flushed, her hair disheveled. She must have been pacing outside, trying to compose herself, but the dam had clearly broken. She saw Quincy, saw the stricken faces of her family, and her eyes landed on me, blazing with a desperate fury. You, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. You planned this. You set us up. You were supposed to fail. Hadley, you were supposed to be a cautionary tale. We needed that money. Your mother was so weak, so sentimental. She was going to ruin everything, leaving it all to a pregnant teenager. We had to protect her legacy. We had to protect our family. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. We justified it. We told ourselves she hated you, that you were a stain on her memory. We had to. Don't you understand? We needed it. I listened, my expression unreadable. Her confession, raw and unfiltered, was exactly what I had expected. The vilification, the self-serving justifications, the twisted logic that allowed them to commit such a cruel act. It was all there. Mom said people reveal their truths when they think they've won, I said, my voice calm, almost a whisper. Thanks for proving hers right, Addison. She stared at me, her chest heaving. Then she let out a frustrated sob and ran back out of the house. Gordon, looking utterly defeated, slowly rose and followed her without a word. Rebecca hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting mine, a flicker of something that might have been shame or perhaps just fear, before she too hurried after her parents. Marlene remained, slumped in her chair, a withered shadow of her former self. Hadley, she whispered, her voice barely audible, I didn't know it was this bad. Addison said, she said your mother was so angry. She wasn't, I said, my voice firm. She loved me. She died loving me. And she left me everything. I looked at her, my gaze unwavering. You let them do this to me, Grandma. You let them steal my mother's last wishes. You let them leave me in a shelter with a newborn baby. You chose them over me, over Mom's truth. Marlene closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was a hollow apology, too little, too late. Go, I said, pointing to the door. Go back to your perfect life. This house isn't for you anymore. She slowly rose, her movements stiff, and shuffled out of the dining room, out of the house. Isabel was the last one. She stood by the table, her eyes red-rimmed. Hadley, she said, her voice trembling, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I know you didn't, Isabel, I said, my voice softening slightly. She was the one innocent in all of this. Go with your family. She nodded, a silent acknowledgment, and then she too left. The next morning the Crawfords were gone, their luggage, their presents, everything. The house felt clean again, purged of their toxic energy. I walked through the quiet rooms, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. I took the framed copy of my mother's true will and hung it in the hallway, right where they used to walk proudly, oblivious to the truth. It was a permanent reminder, a testament to what had been stolen and what had been reclaimed. I walked out to the backyard, the morning sun warm on my face. My eyes fell on the old plum tree, its branches heavy with ripening fruit. I remembered my mother years ago, her hands covered in dirt, a wide smile on her face as she planted the sapling. This is for you, sweet pea, she'd said, a little bit of forever, right here in our yard. A promise kept, a peace earned. The chilling satisfaction of revenge was there, yes, but beneath it a profound sense of justice, of my mother's love finally vindicated. A cold silence settled over the house in the weeks that followed. The air, once thick with their presence, now felt lighter, cleaner. But the victory, while complete, didn't bring the rush of joy I might have expected. It brought a quiet, profound sense of justice. Yes, but also a lingering emotional weathering. Revenge, I realized, wasn't a balm. It was a surgical procedure, precise and necessary, but it still left scars. The years of carrying that burden, that quiet fury, had taken their toll. Sam, however, was oblivious to the deeper currents. He loved having the house to himself again, loved having his mom's full attention. He'd still ask, his brow furrowed with innocent confusion, Mommy, why don't Aunt Addison and Rebecca visit any more? Did they not like my drawings? I'd kneel before him, looking into his bright, trusting eyes. Because, sweet pea, I'd say, my voice soft but firm, karma gave them what they gave us. Sometimes when people do bad things, they lose good things, and they lost their chance to be part of our lives. He'd nod, accepting my explanation, and move on to his next drawing, his world still vibrant and uncomplicated. About 3 weeks after they left, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. Hadley? A hesitant voice asked. It's Isabel. My breath caught. Isabel, I replied, my voice neutral. I I just wanted to say thank you, she said, her voice small. And I'm so sorry about everything. I didn't know. I really didn't. I know, I said. You were the only one who didn't seem to know. I've moved out, she continued, her voice gaining a little strength. I couldn't stay there. Not after I heard everything. I'm staying with a friend for now, trying to figure things out. I just I wanted to know more about Aunt Hadley, your mom, the real her, not what my mom always said. A flicker of something warm, something akin to hope, sparked within me. Isabel was young, still impressionable, but she was seeking truth. She was kind, I said, a small smile touching my lips, and she loved flowers, and she loved me fiercely. She loved you too, Isabel. She always worried about you, about how you were being treated. We talked for a while longer, a tentative bridge forming between us. She asked about my mom's favorite books, her quirks, her laugh. I told her stories, memories I hadn't shared with anyone in years. It wasn't forgiveness, not for the family as a whole, but it was a crack in the wall, a possibility for a different kind of connection. The morning sun poured through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sam was still asleep, curled in his bed. I stood by the counter, a small velvet box in my hand. Inside, nestled on a satin cushion, was my mother's pearl necklace. It was simple, elegant, and had been tucked away in the lockbox with the will, a final, intimate gift. She had worn it on special occasions, and I remembered her letting me try it on as a little girl, the cool pearls against my skin. I lifted it out, the pearls cool and smooth against my fingertips. I fastened the clasp at the back of my neck, the weight of it familiar, comforting. It wasn't just a necklace, it was a legacy, a tangible connection to the woman who had loved me despite what others had claimed. It was a promise fulfilled. The house, the will, the truth. It was all mine, just as she had intended. I walked to the window, looking out at the plum tree in the backyard, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. The tree my mother had planted, a little bit of forever. They had tried to take everything. They had tried to erase me, to erase her love, to erase her final wishes. But they had failed, spectacularly. When my mother died, they gave me nothing. But now, they'll remember me every time they talk about losing everything.